everyone, this is Amber from The Sensible Mama, and today I'm doing part 2 in a 4-part series about miscarriage. As you might know, October is Pregnancy and Infant Loss Awareness Month. So every week of this month, I want to spend a little bit of time bringing attention to this topic that doesn't get nearly the amount of attention it deserves. I'm going to be sharing some statistics from contemporary research. Keep in mind that statistics refer to norms, not absolute truths. So when I quote something as a statistic, that means that although most people will fall into that typical trend, there will be people who don't, and that's okay. My goal isn't to try to say that everyone will have the exact same experience, because we're all individuals and we all experience things differently. So now that I've made those 2 disclaimers, I'd like to go ahead and get started with the topic that I want to speak about today. One of the things that I think needs to be made absolutely clear when we talk about miscarriage is that most women will never know why they had a miscarriage. Now, that really surprised me when I went through my own miscarriage. The fact is that often when you have your first miscarriage, they just tell you that 1 in 4 women will miscarry, especially if it's their first pregnancy, and there's really no reason to look into it because this is just natural. Because so many women are never given an explanation for why they miscarried, they often go looking for an explanation on their own. And sadly, it usually turns out that the explanation they find is self-blame. We might ask ourselves why miscarriage is something that women don't talk about very often. If it's so common and it happens in 1 out of 4 pregnancies for a first-time pregnancy, we should be talking about it more often because it's so common, right? What I have to suspect is that women aren't talking about it because at some level, whether it's rational or emotional or whatever, we feel that we're to blame. So therefore, we don't want to talk about it. I found this question fascinating as I began to process my own miscarriage. And I wanted to know if I could find an answer to why, really why, women didn't want to talk about their miscarriages, just like I didn't want to talk about mine. So I decided to do a little research on my own. I hold a PhD in cognitive psychology, and although I did not study grief when I did my dissertation, part of my training was having to learn how to do good research methodology and good analysis of data in order to answer really important questions. So I'm not going to at all pretend like I know a lot about grief, because I don't. But what I am going to do right now is share with you a few things that I found from a study that I conducted on my own. For any of you who might be concerned, I conducted this study with informed consent from willing participants who had gone through a miscarriage. No one was compensated for this. They did it of their own free will, simply in an effort to help others understand what miscarriage is like. I conducted a study that was done online, and I recruited 500 women to come and talk about their miscarriage. One of the questions that I gave them was to describe the emotions that they felt as they processed the miscarriage after it happened to them. The most prevalent words that people used to describe their emotions were lonely, isolated, alone, ashamed, embarrassed, guilty. When I asked these women to explain how they felt people treated them as a result of their miscarriage, they had the following things to say. No one understands. No one really cares. I feel people are dismissive. I feel that people are well-meaning, but ultimately hurtful. I came to understand as I analyzed this data that the problem was twofold. The first reason why women don't want to talk about their miscarriage is because they feel that somehow they're to blame. And the second reason is that they don't feel that anyone understands, even if they could explain how they feel. And it shouldn't be too surprising that women don't feel that people understand. Unless you've gone through a miscarriage, how are you supposed to know? In my own personal experience, it seemed like people who wanted to talk to me about my miscarriage really didn't understand how profoundly the loss had affected me. People said well-meaning but ultimately hurtful things like, "Don't worry, you'll get pregnant again really soon." And although they really meant to help me out, they didn't understand how deeply those words dug into me. Because you see, I didn't want to be told that I would conceive again quickly. I wanted people to grieve with me in the loss of my child. I didn't want them to be dismissive of the child who had lost its life. I wanted them instead to participate with me in the grief. And it turns out that I'm not the only one who feels that way. In fact, in a study published this year, it was found that women who have a miscarriage process the pain of the loss the exact same way that people process loss of a living human being. That means that in terms of the intensity of the grief, the length of the grief, and the experience of the grief, it is exactly the same for a woman who has had a miscarriage as a woman who has lost a living child or a spouse or a parent or a friend. We wouldn't tell someone who just lost a living child to not worry that they would have another child soon. Instead, we would participate with them in the grief of that loss. As it turns out, women who have had miscarriages are looking for the exact same thing. Sadly, they seldom get it. And it's not anybody's fault. No one can be expected to understand what to do unless they have been through a miscarriage themselves. But the end result is the same. A woman feels alone in just about every way. It turns out that most women don't even feel that they can turn to their spouses or partners when they go through a miscarriage because they don't seem to understand either. Now, this is not in any way to say that a partner of someone who's gone through a miscarriage does not feel grief, sadness, remorse, and anger, just like the person who has gone through the physical miscarriage. But I do want to point out what science says. And science indicates that a woman, when she becomes pregnant and becomes aware of her pregnancy, begins feeling like a mother at that moment. Once again, I'm speaking about trends, not about everyone, so it's okay if you weren't someone who immediately felt like a mom when you got pregnant. On the other hand, science says that the husband, spouse, or partner of a woman who is pregnant does not feel like a father until the baby is born. So, while a mother is grieving the loss of a child that she felt like she was the mother of from the very beginning, her spouse is usually processing the loss of the idea of a future child. So women who are going through a miscarriage feel like they can't speak to their partners and they can't speak to their friends or family because no one really seems to understand. In the absence of a medical explanation for their miscarriage and in the absence of anyone around to really talk to about their problem, what happens is these women begin to look inside. They begin searching on the inside for an explanation of why they had the miscarriage, and they start doing self-talk. Often, that self-talk becomes negative. Women begin asking themselves what they could have done differently, what they should have done better. Was it something I ate? Was it something I said? Was it something I did? By the way, if you are a person of faith, you are almost 60% more likely to feel like you are to blame for your miscarriage or that you are being punished for your miscarriage. That was a finding from a scientific study, not my own opinion. But I can say from my own personal experience that that was what happened to me. I was in such bad need of finding an explanation for why this happened to me that it seemed like the best thing to do was to just heap blame upon myself and assume that this was happening to me because I did something wrong and therefore I deserved it. Now, this is obviously flawed thinking, so I'm not encouraging that way of thinking whatsoever. But what I am saying is that it's a very real thing that women go through when they've had a miscarriage. Some women will move quickly through the grief process and will end up in a healthy place pretty quickly. Other women, like me, will have to go through a lot of processing, including self-blame, blame of your spouse, blame of God, blame of the universe, whatever it may be, before they become at peace with what happened to them. For me personally, the only way that I was able to finally process the grief and let go was to talk about it. But unfortunately, I had to overcome a lot of the barriers of talking to other people, including my own shame and my sense that no one else could understand. If you caught my video last week, you know that video was the first time that I had shared my story with just about anyone aside from close friends or family. After a lot of careful consideration, I decided to share this video on my Facebook page, even though I hardly ever do that because I just don't like mixing my YouTube channel with what's going on my Facebook page. What I found after I posted this video was friend after friend after friend reaching out to me both publicly on my wall and privately via text or chat to tell me that they had been through the exact same thing. I couldn't believe that I knew that many women who had been through a miscarriage, who I speak to on a daily basis, and this had never come up between us at all. As I spoke with these women, I realized that we were all dealing with a little bit of self-blame. We were all questioning whether we had done something to cause this. We were all wondering if there was something we could have done differently, and we were all dealing with the fact that although none of these things could be true, we were still grappling with them anyway. And there was just something about realizing that there were other people, even friends of mine, who were experiencing the exact same thing that I was, that helped me to finally get my head around some of these faulty thoughts that I was having about my miscarriage. And I was finally able to realize that I'm not at fault for this, even though I kind of knew that already. I really came to know it. So even though I made that video for you, it really ended up being a pretty big benefit to me instead. So to speak from my own experience, if you're someone who has gone through a miscarriage and you're still suffering with the grief of it, or the shame or the guilt or any of those things that are weighing heavy on your shoulders, I want to encourage you to reach out and talk to somebody. Share your story. But if you're speaking to someone who has never been through a miscarriage themselves, it might be better to ask them to just listen and hold off on talking for a little while. Step 1 is just sharing your story. Step 2 is finding people who have been through it as well, who can share those thoughts and feelings with you. If you don't personally know anyone who has been through a miscarriage and you need someone to talk to, there are tons of great resources that you can reach out to. One is throughtheheart.org. This website offers wonderful support services and even a comfort care kit to help you get through your miscarriage. They have a support line you can call if you need to speak to someone urgently. And their website is filled with useful resources to help you. Another great place you can go to talk about your experience is Babycenter. Babycenter has actually got tons of forums devoted just to this topic. If you're not someone who likes to chat, you can lurk these pages. You can just read other women's stories and nod your head and realize that other people are going through the exact same thing. So I guess I want to wrap up by saying 3 things. 1, you are not alone. 2, you are not to blame. And 3, if you think either of those 2 things, then you desperately need to reach out to someone and talk to them about what you're feeling. There are plenty of people who can help you. Since my last video, several people have reached out to me saying that they know someone who's gone through a miscarriage and they wonder what they're supposed to say to that person. I've touched on a few things in this video about some of the well-meaning but hurtful things that people say when they talk about miscarriage. So in my next video, I'm going to talk more extensively about that. I'm going to talk about how you can better support someone who's been through a miscarriage and what you can say and what you should maybe not say in order to help them on their journey. I hope you found this helpful. And if you're someone who's been down this road like I have, I'm so sorry that we're a part of this club together. I'll see you next week.